you've seen me while you were viewing the videos. I was your instructor for this course. Now we have a live YouTube session, which is live, but you'll still see me, and not in person, but in a video. And it was a pleasure, along with my TAs, our course team. We worked hard to provide the appropriate material for the course. It was a 5-week course, and we received a lot of good feedback, a lot of comments, and we tried to provide the appropriate, the effective response. We're still trying to improve our process, but we tried to do our best. And the purpose of this live YouTube session is to kind of give you an overall overview of the course, I guess, post hoc, as opposed to going in now that you've covered all the material. But in any event, try to point out some key concepts that I thought some of the students were having a hard time comprehending, or some concepts that were frameworks or models that I thought were a bit tricky and was confusing to students. And I'll talk a little bit about the final exam. I'm sure that a lot of you, if not all of you, have already seen the exam by now. So obviously I can't go into the details of the questions itself, because it's right in front of you, but I can actually talk about what my expectations are, what I will be expecting from the final exam based on what you've learned and so forth. So that's my agenda, and that's what I hope to achieve in this live session. So let's start out by an overview of the course. The course was built on mostly around the 4 Ps, which is product, price, place, and promotion. And we threw in a couple of supplementary concepts, such as market orientation. And we tried to build all of this within the context of an international business context, a global marketing context. So let's just start off week by week. So in week 1, the major topic was market orientation. And this has been a very defining and a pillar concept in marketing strategy and in practice since 1990, since the concept was first introduced. And the important thing here is to know what the definition of market orientation is and how it's different from marketing orientation, because in some of the comments in the discussion board, I saw some comments where some students were getting confused and mixing up market orientation with marketing orientation. And in the article that I had you guys read, What the Hell is Market Orientation? It actually talks about that, because market orientation and marketing orientation is different in the sense that market orientation is at the firm level. It's an organization-wide concept, and that's captured in the definition of market orientation. So it does not pertain to, disseminating or gathering intelligence about the market from the marketing department, but it's more about doing this collectively as a whole from the firm's perspective. So it's really about how the organization moves towards being more sensitive to market sensing, and how it's responsive to the needs of the market and so forth. And it's not restricted to one department per se, which in this case would be the marketing department. So if it were a marketing orientation, then the focus would be on the marketing department taking the lead role and generating intelligence, disseminating intelligence, and responding to it solely from the marketing department's perspective. But as the definition of market orientation implies, it's not related to one department per se, but it's a collective effort from the organization as a whole, which differentiates market orientation from marketing orientation. And then another key important aspect in week 1 was differentiating, the difference between different types of market orientation in terms of responsive or proactive market orientation, or put differently, market driving market orientation or market driven market orientation. So it's important to understand, how these two differ. Although they're both market orientation, one is more aggressive, one is more proactive. One drives the market, whereas one is merely responding and reacting to the needs of the customers. So a lot of companies that have been successful, if we trace back, these were companies that were market driving or engaging in a proactive market orientation. It doesn't necessarily mean that, if you're market driven or if you're responsive, you can't be successful. That's not the point. The point is you can be successful by being market driven and being responsive. But just, anecdotal, not just anecdotal evidence, but empirical data supports the fact that, a lot of the leading firms like Airbnb, Uber, Apple, Microsoft, all of these are well-known, B2B or B2C companies that are, very well-known throughout the world, have been market driving or, have exercised, implemented proactive market orientation. So that's just something to be, careful about in knowing the distinction between the two different types of market orientation. So that was the key idea behind week one, and also the three dimensions of market orientation, which is customer orientation, competitor orientation, and interfunctional coordination, or market intelligence generation, dissemination, and responsiveness. So these are the three dimensions of MO. And then moving on to week two, we talked about positioning, STP, segmentation, targeting, and positioning. And segmentation is dividing, partitioning the customers into different groups, classifying and clustering groups of customers according to their similarities and whatever those similarities may be, whether it be demographic information such as, simple as gender, education, age, religious background, socioeconomic status. These are more of the, tangible, observable factors, but a lot of the times, marketers segment customers based on more unobservable factors such as psychographics, values, lifestyles, things like that. So these are more of the intangible aspects that marketers use to segment customers, because researchers have found out that people who have similar lifestyles, or who have similar, habits or hobbies, for that matter, engage or reveal behavior that's consistently similar. They buy stuff, they prefer brands that are similar, and so forth. So whichever is a better predictor in terms of explaining consumer behavior should be the factor that should be probably used to segment the customers. And then we also talked about positioning, which is about, it's implanting a unique and differentiated brand identity in the minds of customers. So if we go back to the definition of positioning, it's really about how you convey the brand identity in the market, and whether consumers actually perceive the brand identity in the way that the firm intended it to be. So how consumers perceive how the firm is trying to portray their brand would be brand image, and the former would be brand identity. So an effective or a successful positioning would be where, I think I talked about this in my video using the Venn diagrams, is where if there's significant overlap between brand identity and brand image, the more overlap there is, the better it is. And the less overlap there is, that means that the company is trying to send a message, trying to position their brand in a certain way in the market, which is their brand identity. But for some reason, the consumers do not perceive or comprehend the brand the way that the company wants the consumers to, perceive it, which means that there is a gap and a discrepancy between brand identity and brand image, which implies that the positioning strategy has been ineffective. So that is what we covered, basically in week 2. In week 3, we talked about products. So we're going now into the first of the 4 Ps, which was products and how products are different from brands. We talked about, product is not a thing. Product is more of an experience. It's a solution. Products are things that are used to solve customers' problems. Customers don't buy a 1/4-inch drill. They want a tool, a means to achieve an end, which is a hole. So it could be anything. It doesn't have to be a 1/4-inch drill. It could be something else. It could be another tool. As long as, it satisfies a certain need of a customer or it solves a problem, that is a successful product or a service. So I just want to underscore that we need to move away from viewing products or services as a physical or an intangible thing per se, but more of a solution provider. It's a means to an end, basically, and that product is nothing more than a means. And we talked about marketing myopia, which is, having a very narrow view of the product, which can get people into trouble. So if you view product as a thing, then the likelihood that you will, fall into this trap of marketing myopia increases, right? Because then you're not able to expand, your definition of, the boundaries of what a product is, which will sort of force you to view your business in a very narrow-minded manner. And then we talked about brands and how brands are different from products. Brands really, so products, when products are added into, a social context, where, products are evolved within the society, consumers provide meaning, they provide, interpretation to a product, and that gets shared throughout the society. It gets disseminated and people develop, images, understandings, interpretations of a product. That's what a brand is. So a brand is, it's the cultural lens, the social lens through which, products get interpreted in the minds of customers within, a market or a society. We also talked about, I think, what was it? We also talked about the psychological adoption of products, especially new products, why they have a hard time being adopted by customers. And a lot of this sometimes has to do with the psychological aspect because they can't, overcome that psychological barrier. So a new product has to be significantly greater than the incumbent product for a customer to think about, upgrading or replacing. If it's only incrementally, superior or, improved, then the chances of being adopted reduce significantly, because it goes back to what we talked about in our video about loss aversion or prospect theory, in the sense that losses loom larger than gains. So if I have an incumbent product and I want to replace that with a new product, that means that I have to give up my existing product, which is a loss, in order to obtain, a new benefit, which is a gain from the new product. And since losses loom larger than gains, if the absolute amount of the gain is equivalent to the absolute amount of the loss from the incumbent product, then, customers are going to have a hard time convincing themselves that, the new product is better than the incumbent product. It's only when, the new product is significantly greater. I'm not going to put a number to it, but people have said, based on the article that you guys have read, it can range from 4 times to 10 times. The new product has to be better than the old product for customers to, feel, at ease and psychologically comfortable to adopt the new product. Okay, so that was week 3. Week 4, we talked about pricing. And we also mentioned that pricing is a Tricky P, it's one of those P's that gets emphasized probably the least, you know, because for some reason, a lot of companies deal with pricing, you know, in the accounting department or in the finance department, and marketing, you know, does not take a leadership role on it. But we said that, you know, a small tweak in price or a 1% increase in price can have a significant, you know, impact on profitability or in downstream, you know, profitability. Therefore, marketers need to get their price straight, because even we as customers, you know, we're very sensitive to price, because if the price is not right, despite everything being correct, then, you know, we're hesitant to buy the product. So getting the price right is an important, you know, it's one of the important things that, you know, marketers have to master. Price has to do with fairness, equity, because as consumers, we think that, oh, if the price is too high, we think that, oh, that's not fair. That's not a fair price. You know, they're trying to rip us off or take advantage of us and so forth. So getting the price right is an important thing that will increase your chances of making more sales. So we talked about value-based pricing, and you know, and mostly in terms of value. When we say value-based pricing here, we're talking about economic value per se. We're not talking about value that's social value or experiential value, these intangible soft values, but we're talking about financial value or economic value. So value-based pricing, basically, you know, an easy way to understand this is I'm pricing my product or service based on how much cost savings or how much more economic value that my product is able to provide compared to, you know, the next best alternative offering. So if I have an innovative product that I'm introducing into the market, and I believe that if my customers use my product instead of the next best product that's out there in the market, and if they're able to save cost, or if they're able to increase their productivity, and therefore that leads to more sales and profitability, then that's all captured in more economic value. Therefore, the essence of value-based pricing is, how do we capture that difference in economic value that my product is able to provide compared to the incumbent product, and how do we incorporate that, capture that into our pricing? Are we going, so if the difference between, if the economic value difference between my product and the next best alternative offering is, let's say, you know, $200, am I going to add that $200 onto, you know, the next best alternative offerings price, capture 100% of that, or am I going to capture 50% of that, or so forth? So, you know, that's, you know, that's an empirical question. You know, there's no right one answer. It's a case-by-case thing that we have to consider. But the essence of value-based pricing is, how do we capture the difference in economic value between my product and the next best alternative offering, and how do we reflect that, incorporate that, factor that into our pricing? That is the essence of value-based pricing. Okay, so that was week 4. And then in week 5, we talked about channels and distributions and marketing communications. So we talked about, you know, place, which is channels and distributions. You know, it's one of those things that it was, I think it was one of the questions that was on the discussion board for week 5, in terms of why it's so difficult to change and alter a distribution strategy compared to the other P's. It's basically because there's 2 factors. One is, typically, you know, you're dealing with another partner in a distribution strategy. So I have to deal with a wholesaler or a distributor or a retailer. So, you know, a lot of these things are beyond my control. Product, price, or, you know, marketing communications, most of this is under the control of the company. I can change my price at my will. I can change the product configuration at my will. I can change the marketing message at my will. But for place, distributions, or channels, it's possible, but it just takes time, and there's a lot more challenges that you'll probably encounter because I'm dealing with another company, which is these intermediaries that may have different goals, that may have different objectives, and when they're goal incompatible, it takes time and effort to iron that out. It's just a more challenging task than the other P's. We talked about the intensity of the distribution, whether it's exclusive, whether it's selective, or it's intensive. We talked about power, conflict, vertical conflict, horizontal conflict, and so forth. We talked about the distribution trap. So those were the things that I think we talked about in terms of distributions and channels. We also looked at how a lot of companies that went overseas, that were very successful in their channel distributions, but since they exported their business model basically, unchanged to other parts of the world, like Home Depot, or we talked about Best Buy, these very successful big box stores in the U.S., they basically, threw in the towel and had to retreat from China. So there's quite a few examples of successful big companies. These are not small companies, very big companies that have a lot of resources. Despite that, they really didn't do their homework, or they may have done their homework, but for some reason they were very arrogant. They didn't want to change. They were insistent on pursuing the business model that worked, in the U.S., and they try to replicate that in other parts of the world where there's a lot of cultural differences, there's a lot of consumer behavior differences, there's a lot of regulatory differences, legal differences, supplier, partner, supply chain differences, and so forth. And these nuances were not factored in, and they didn't adjust appropriately, and therefore had to pull out. And then we also talked about marketing communications in terms of advertising. We talked about horizontal advertising, vertical advertising, and the importance of social media, online reviews, how they're changed the landscape of how consumers are, getting to know companies, brands, establishments, and these online reviews. We talked about this O continuum, where certain product categories are more prone to be successful if they rely more on online reviews as opposed to others, and how the emergence of this online review mechanism within social media is changing how advertising strategies are being implemented, and how small companies that don't have the muscle, that don't have the financial resources, that don't have the brand name, these mom and pop shops, family-owned businesses, are able to get the word out without using a lot of money, can actually be very successful in attracting customers, as long as there's this widespread dissemination and diffusion of word of mouth and goodwill that spreads between customers in a given market. So that was something that we talked about in marketing communication. So that was week 5. In terms of the discussion board questions and the self-reflections, the discussion board questions were meant to sort of give you an idea of some of the key concepts. I may have covered these already in this live YouTube session, but it was meant to give you, an opportunity to sort of exercise how much you fully understand some of the core concepts from each week. And then the self-reflections were about cases. I just want to mention one thing about, I think, I read some comments where I think some students were a little bit confused regarding the disruptive positioning strategy between the breakaway positioning strategy and the reverse positioning strategy. The Yellowtail case, although the title implies the title says breakaway, But that's misleading, actually. And in my opinion, that's incorrect. To be precise and to be accurate, the yellowtail case example is a disruptive position strategy that falls under a reverse position strategy, whereas the Swatch case is an example of a breakaway position strategy. So just to make a long story short, the key difference between these two disruptive position strategies is that in the reverse position strategy, as the name implies, it's reverse. It's going in the opposite direction of the industry, or it's going in the opposite direction of the product or service category as a whole. So the key word here is as a whole. It's going against the direction of the entire product category as a whole in the aggregate. So it's not going against one particular brand or company in an industry, but it's going against the trend of the industry as a whole. So going back to that yellowtail case, as you may have noticed by now, Yellowtail did everything differently from all the wine companies. All the wine companies were competing based on complex, sophisticated labeling, very sophisticated, elegant design, packaging. The message or the positioning strategy was trying to create a brand image of sophistication, knowledge, experts, exclusivity, white tablecloth, elegance, and so forth. So it had a snobby to some people, it was arrogant, it was difficult to understand, which collectively, threw off a lot of people, alienated a lot of people that didn't understand that, or, thought all of that was bubble, didn't want to get into all of that complexity. And Yellowtail understood that. So they, stripped all of that out. They simplified things. They went against the wine industry basically as a whole by simplifying the packaging, by making it, funny, by using bright color, using kangaroos or wallabies on the packages, which was never heard of in the wine industry. All of these things, they first started out with just, red and white. For red, it was Cabernet Sauvignon. For white, it was Chardonnay. And then they sort of, branched out. But initially, it was just two different types of wine, two grapes. Very simple, no complex labeling. It really caught on, with the customers. It attracted a lot of beer drinkers. It attracted a lot of people that even didn't drink alcohol because they wanted to try it out, and so forth. So it really grew and expanded the pie in the wine industry by attracting non-drinkers, or attracted people that switched from other types of alcohol to wine, that didn't drink wine previously. So that's that. So Yellowtail is a good example of a reverse. Now, breakaway is an example of another disruptive position strategy, but it's different from reverse in the sense that you are expanding the existing product or service category by creating a subcategory, and the way that that's done is by borrowing concepts from a different product category. Okay, so it's borrowing certain, concepts, ideas from a totally different product category and integrating that, adding that to the existing product category to create a new subcategory within, the existing product or service category. So, for instance, the Swatch case is a good example because, before Swatch, there were basically two different types of watches. There were the luxury watches, the Rolexes of the world, the Omegas of the world, the Cartiers of the world, where watch was viewed as fine jewelry because they had precious stones, diamonds, gold. It was an heirloom. It was passed on from generations to generations, and so forth. And then there were these, functional watches, like Texas Instrument, TI, a lot of the Japanese watches, Casio, Seiko, where it was run on batteries, and the goal of that one, those set of watches. It was just functional. It was meant to keep time. It wasn't about luxury. It wasn't about self-image. It was just, it was a timekeeping device. That's all it was. And then Swatch came along and said, okay, well, let's create another sub-segment in this watch, and let's borrow some concepts and ideas from the fashion accessory industry. Therefore, they borrowed, a lot of the things that were used and popular in the fashion accessory industry and incorporated that into their watch. That's why you see all these flamboyant, bold, designs, colors, and people viewed Swatch as a fashionable accessory. So that's why you saw people having multiple swatches, because fashion accessories, if you're a woman, or you may have several scarves, or if you're a man, you may have several neckties, because these are fashionable accessories. So same thing with Swatch. I mean, I think it was the average Italian had 6 or 7 swatches. So you would wear these on different occasions, depending on whether who you're going out with and on what occasion. So it allowed people to purchase multiple swatches, that fit different occasions, which was consistent with the idea of a fashionable accessory. And because of that, that was reflected in how they, implemented their 4 Ps. So going back to, I think it was week 2 when we talked about positioning, I think we talked in the video, we talked about the fact that companies implement positioning strategies using the 4 Ps. So 4 Ps are a means to, exercise positioning of a brand. So because Swatch was positioned using the breakaway positioning strategy, that was the 4 Ps that were used was consistent with a breakaway positioning strategy. And I think this was one of the questions that was in the self-reflection question. So so those were the 2, and then in week 4 we had the Kunst case, which was in a B2B context, and that's a fairly complex case. It's a very short case, but nonetheless, there's a lot of numbers to consider, and that's why I shared with you a lot of these files to give you a full disclosure of the data that should be factored in arriving at some of these calculations. And pricing, by nature, because it's price, a price has a number attached to it. It does require. It's probably one of those areas within the 4 Ps that's most quantitative. It requires a lot of calculations, and I gave you a case to give you a flavor of what companies have to do to arrive at a pricing decision when they use value-based pricing. And we also discussed the concept of value in use, VIU, and how that all ties in with value in use pricing or value-based pricing. So the Kunst case was more of a numbers-driven case. And I know that, for a lot of the students, that could have been very daunting and intimidating, but you have all the information there. So hopefully you'll be able to take some time and walk through how the calculations were done, because it's all in the spreadsheet that I shared with you guys. And hopefully that'll make all sense. And we shared, our course team shared, a high level feedback with you in terms of these self-reflections. So, if you read, the feedback from the self-reflections, that sort of gives you an idea of what we're looking for. It's not going to be precisely, obviously, but the general ballpark figure, that really captures the essence of what we're looking for in terms of the questions that were posted for the self-reflections. Okay, I think I've covered most, so let me talk a little bit about the final exam. Like I said, I'm sure that a lot of you have already seen the exam. So there's 5 questions, 1 from each week, and you have basically a week. You can stop and go as you wish. So there's really no time pressure. It's open book. you can use all the resources that I gave you for this course. So it's like a short essay type of question, and try to use the materials that you were given, the videos, the articles, the PowerPoint slides, the self-reflection questions, the board discussion questions. As you can see, like informed you guys on our course page, these questions are very similar to the board discussion questions and the self-reflection questions. So if you were comfortable answering those self-reflection board discussion questions, these are not very different from those type of questions. So it should not come as a surprise. Since you'll have a lot of time, I'm going to be very specific and be looking for very strong reasoning argument, how you package your thoughts, your ideas, your arguments. So try to make sense of how you put things together so that you're able to communicate in a very effective, persuasive way what you're trying to say. Don't go off tangent or in a random manner, because given the time that you have and all the resources they have in front of you, I'll be expecting things that are very tight, logical arguments that are grounded in the stuff that we've covered over this course. So I hope you'll be able to answer those 5 questions in that manner. So this, I think, wraps up summarizes and wraps up what I had in mind for this live YouTube. It was a pleasure, having this course. I want to thank my our course team, my TAs, and the people at edX for helping me out. If it weren't for them, I think I would have gotten in a lot of trouble. They're just great people to work with, and I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've gotten something out of it. And if you get a chance after the finals, if you can provide me with some feedback in terms of how to improve the course, what went well, what can be improved, I would greatly appreciate it. And definitely I'll factor that in going into the future. So thank you very much. Good luck. And we'll end it here. Thank you.